Here's an essay that I just wrote and I'm about to send out to the Cove congregation. It's entitled A Godly Nation. Although I believe most Christians would like their nation to be guided by godly principles, there doesn't seem to be any agreement about how that might be brought about. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't have options. I'll tell you, it seems as though everybody and his sister have ideas about how their country might be brought more in line with the teachings of Jesus Christ. For example, there are plenty of Christians who believe that a nation under God must have a certain position on specific issues, such as abortion and homosexuality and prayer in schools. Some even suggest that Christians must take a stance on gun control, immigration, and global warming. For them, a Christian stance is very precise. But for as many who take a very narrow perspective on what it means to be a Christian country, the view of others seem more, broad and esoteric, encompassing qualities like honesty and humility and justice, as well as mercy, compassion, and grace. And so, even though it seems clear that there are plenty of believers who want to move in a certain direction, how to get there appears pretty murky. And frankly, I find that interesting. Because when we look into the Bible, Jesus seemed very clear about the basis by which the nations will be judged. I mean, just consider what he told his disciples right before they shared their Last Supper. According to Matthew, he said, "When he finally comes, blazing in beauty and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as a shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right and the goats to his left." Now, I recognize that if we apply this passage at all, we usually assume that it relates to individuals. But that's not how it reads in Greek. You see, the words used are panta ta ethne, which literally means all the nations. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that what follows establishes the criteria by which all the nations will be judged, including our own, with those who are doing God's will joining the sheep on the right and those who aren't finding themselves with the goats on the left. And again, according to Matthew, this is what Jesus said. "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation. And here's why. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me.'" Now, this is how Jesus defined a godly nation. And since his perspective must also involve humility, he continued, "Then those sheep are going to say, 'Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you?' Then the king will say, 'I'm telling you the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me." Now, that's what Jesus said. And I'll tell you, it's right here that we find the definition of a country that will be judged as righteous in God's sight. You see, they're the ones who show basic acts of kindness and generosity to people who are generally overlooked or ignored. A country that sees helping the poor and the sick as important. A country that believes that relieving human suffering is a national priority. Now, in some translations, these destitute folks are called the least of these, my brethren. But the meaning is the same. Like it or not, the United States will be judged not based on our adherence to a specific set of political doctrine or a vague set of moral principles. Rather, it's going to be grounded on the concrete good we've done for those who are often viewed as unimportant and marginal. And as citizens of a country that's been well blessed by God, I don't think we should ever forget these words of Christ, this time from the Gospel of Luke. The servant who knows what his master wants and ignores it, or who insolently does whatever he pleases, will be thoroughly thrashed. But if he does a poor job through ignorance, he will get off with a slap on the hand. Great gifts mean great responsibilities. Greater gifts, greater responsibilities. If we believe what Jesus taught, this is how our nation will be judged. And just so we understand the consequences of assuming that we can reject this very specific set of actions, but still win God's favor by using a lot of vague spiritual language, Jesus offered a clear illustration of those who are moved over to the left side. He said, "Then he will turn to the goats, the ones on his left, and say, 'Get out, worthless goats, you are good for nothing but the fires of hell.' And why? Because I was hungry and you gave me no meal. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was homeless and you gave me no bed. I was shivering and you gave me no clothes. Sick and in prison and you never visited." Then those goats are going to say, "Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or homeless or shivering or sick or in prison and didn't help?" He will answer them, "I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you fail to do one of these things to someone who was being overlooked or ignored, that was me. You failed to do it to me." Then those goats will be herded to their eternal doom, but the sheep into their eternal reward. And so here it is. Unless we want to do some interpretive gymnastics, we know exactly the basis for how our nation will be judged by God. It's not rocket science here. And if we're doing what we've been called and equipped to do, we'll be judged as godly, and if not, we'll be hanging out with the goats. Of course, just knowing the basis doesn't actually mean very much. Somewhere down the line, we really need to do something about it. Amen.